Security, keep an eye on her. Emily Whitmore's voice sliced through the polished silence of the bank like a blade, loud enough to turn every head in the room as her eyes dragged slowly over Vanessa Carter's jeans, her simple sweater, the absence of anything that screamed money. People like you don't walk in here asking for six-figure withdrawals. A few customers shifted in their seats. One man let out a quiet chuckle. A woman near the glass office leaned closer, pretending not to listen. But Vanessa didn't move, didn't react. She stood there with the same stillness that had carried her through boardrooms, through billion-dollar negotiations, through rooms where she was underestimated long before she ever spoke. She placed her tablet gently on the marble counter, the soft sound barely noticeable against the tension building in the air. "I'm here to complete a transaction," she said, her voice calm, even controlled. Like none of this was new, like she had heard it before. Emily smirked, folding her arms as if she had already decided the outcome. "Then you should try a different branch," she replied, her tone dripping with dismissal. "We deal with verified clients here." The word verified hung heavy, coded, deliberate, and the room felt smaller, tighter, like the walls themselves were leaning in to watch what would happen next. A young teller glanced down at the screen in front of her, hesitating, uncertain, but said nothing. Near the entrance, a man in a navy suit slowed his steps, sensing the shift, his eyes moving between Vanessa and the manager, measuring, judging, waiting. Vanessa's gaze didn't waver. She had seen this look before, at 23 when her first account was flagged without reason, at 26 when a loan officer smiled politely while denying her with numbers that didn't add up, and now again, years later, in a building that ran on policies she helped design. She let the silence stretch just long enough to make it uncomfortable. Then she spoke again, quieter this time, sharper. "Run my name." Emily let out a short laugh, dismissive, almost amused, as if the request itself was ridiculous. "We don't have time for games," she said, snapping her fingers toward the security desk, the gesture small but loud in meaning. Two guards straightened, exchanging a glance before stepping forward slowly. The shift was immediate, subtle but undeniable. Customers leaned back, some watching openly now, others pretending not to, the tension no longer hidden. And still Vanessa didn't move, didn't raise her voice, didn't explain herself. She simply reached into her coat pocket, pulled out her phone, and dialed a number from memory, her posture steady, her expression unreadable, as if everything unfolding around her had already been accounted for. "Yes," she said when the line picked up, her voice low but carrying. "It's happening again." A pause, brief, precise, her eyes lifting to meet Emily's. Not with anger, not with fear, but with something colder, something final. "Initiate protocol." She ended the call and placed the phone beside her tablet. And for a moment, nothing changed. The bank still looked the same, the marble floors still gleamed. The soft hum of printers and keyboards continued. But beneath it, unseen, something had already begun to move. The guards slowed as they approached, not rushing, not aggressive, just present enough to make the message clear. One positioned slightly to Vanessa's left, the other a few steps behind, creating a quiet pressure that filled the space between them. Emily watched with a satisfied tilt of her head, as if the situation had already resolved itself. "Ma'am, we are going to need you to step away from the counter," one of the guards said, his voice careful, practiced, the kind that carried authority without raising volume. Vanessa did not turn to look at him. Her eyes remained forward, steady on the polished surface of the desk, as if she were reading something invisible written there. "I am not causing a disturbance," she replied, calm, measured, each word placed exactly where it needed to be. The guard hesitated for half a second, just enough to show he heard the difference between her tone and the accusation behind it. But Emily stepped in before that pause could grow into doubt. "She has already refused to cooperate," Emily said sharply, her voice lifting again just enough to pull more attention from the room. "And we cannot have unverified individuals requesting access to high-value accounts." The phrase landed like policy, but the intent behind it was personal, unmistakable. A man seated near the far wall leaned forward, elbows on his knees, watching openly now, while a woman near the private office door crossed her arms, her expression tightening, not comfortable, not convinced. Vanessa let a slow breath settle in her chest. Not visible, not dramatic, just enough to center herself in the moment. She had learned that control was not about silence. It was about timing, and the room was shifting. She could feel it, small fractures forming in the certainty that had surrounded her just moments ago. The young teller who had glanced at the screen earlier now looked again, her fingers hovering over the keyboard, uncertain, as if the system in front of her might tell a different story than the one being spoken out loud. Run the name, Vanessa said again. Slightly firmer this time, not louder, but impossible to ignore. Emily's smile thinned, the confidence in it sharpening into something more defensive. There is nothing to run. She replied quickly, too quickly, and for the first time the rhythm of the room broke. Just slightly, just enough. The guard nearest Vanessa shifted his stance, no longer fully certain of his position, and in that subtle movement, the balance of the moment tilted, not visibly, not yet, but enough that those watching could feel it, a quiet ripple moving through the space. Then from behind the counter, the teller finally spoke, her voice tentative but real. "I think I see something," she said, eyes still on the screen, the words hanging in the air like a thread that could unravel everything. Emily turned sharply, her composure tightening. "You are mistaken," she cut in, quick and controlled, but the interruption came a fraction too fast, a fraction too forceful, and now people were no longer just watching. They were listening, measuring, questioning. Vanessa lifted her gaze slightly, not to the manager, not to the guards, but to the room itself, and for the first time, the silence around her did not feel isolating. It felt like anticipation, like something just beneath the surface was about to rise, and somewhere deep within the systems that powered the bank, unseen and unannounced, the protocol she had activated was already beginning to take hold. The words from the teller did not disappear. They lingered, stretching across the polished counter like a crack forming in glass. "I think I see something," she repeated, quieter this time but steadier, her eyes fixed on the screen as if the truth there was stronger than the pressure in the room. Emily's posture tightened instantly, her shoulders pulling back, her jaw setting in a way that tried to reclaim control. "Step away from the terminal," she said, her voice no longer smooth but sharpened by urgency. The teller hesitated, fingers still hovering above the keyboard, caught between instruction and instinct, and that hesitation spoke louder than anything else. Vanessa did not move, but something in her presence shifted, not visible, not dramatic, just a subtle change in gravity, like the room itself had begun to orbit her instead of the authority that had tried to push her out. The guard to her left glanced briefly toward the screen, then back to Emily, uncertainty flickering across his face before he masked it again. But it was there, and others saw it too. A man near the entrance straightened, his attention now fully engaged, while the woman by the office door uncrossed her arms, leaning forward slightly, as if drawn in by something she could not yet name. Emily stepped closer to the counter, placing her hand flat against the marble, a controlled gesture meant to reassert dominance. "There is nothing there," she said again, slower this time, deliberate, as if repetition could overwrite reality. But the teller swallowed, her voice small but unwavering. "It is a corporate-level profile," she said, and the words landed heavier than expected. Corporate level, not personal, not local, something larger, something beyond the branch. The air shifted again, this time more noticeable, like a current running through the room. Vanessa's gaze lifted just slightly, not toward the manager, not toward the guards, but toward the reflection of the ceiling lights in the marble, her expression calm, almost distant, as if she had already stepped beyond this moment and was simply waiting for everyone else to catch up. She had seen this pattern before, the resistance, the denial, the quiet panic that came when assumptions began to collapse under facts. At 23, they froze her account without explanation. At 26, they called her high risk despite the numbers in front of them. And each time she had learned the same lesson: truth did not need volume. It needed time. And now time was doing its work. Emily's composure cracked just enough to reveal what lay beneath it, a flicker of doubt, quickly buried, but not before it was noticed. "Run a secondary verification," she snapped, shifting tactics, her tone now edged with something closer to concern than authority. But the teller did not move, her eyes still scanning the screen, absorbing more than she had expected to find. "It is already verified," she said. And this time there was no hesitation. The statement clear, complete, undeniable. A silence followed, not empty, but charged, the kind that made every small movement louder, every breath more noticeable. Vanessa reached for her phone again, not to call, not to speak, just to place it beside her tablet with quiet precision. And as she did, somewhere beyond the walls of the branch, beyond the view of anyone standing there, systems were aligning, access levels were being reviewed, logs were being pulled, and what had started as a moment of dismissal was becoming something else entirely, something that could no longer be contained within the narrow space of a single counter, a single manager, or a single assumption. The silence did not break all at once. It shifted in layers, like something underneath the surface finally beginning to rise. Emily's hand remained pressed against the marble, but the confidence behind it had thinned, her eyes flicking briefly toward the teller's screen, before snapping back to Vanessa as if refusing to acknowledge what was already unfolding. "Corporate level means nothing without authorization," she said, her voice steadier than she felt, clinging to procedure, like it could still hold the moment together. But the words did not land the same way anymore, not after what had just been revealed. The guard to Vanessa's left took a small step back, not obvious, not dramatic, just enough to signal distance. The kind of distance people create when they sense a shift in power but do not yet understand it. Across the room, the man in the navy suit stood fully now, no longer pretending to wait for his turn, his attention fixed, his posture alert, while the woman near the office door took a slow step closer, drawn in by something she could now feel but not yet name. Vanessa finally moved, just slightly, her fingers brushing against the edge of her tablet as she turned it a few degrees on the counter, aligning it with quiet precision, her movements deliberate, controlled, like someone who had already decided the outcome and was simply allowing the process to catch up. She had seen this moment before, not here, not with these faces, but in rooms, where doubt turned into recognition, where dismissal turned into consequence. And she understood something they did not. The system did not forget. The system recorded everything, every word, every action, every decision made under the assumption that no one important was watching. Emily exhaled slowly, then straightened, forcing her shoulders back, reclaiming what she could. "We are escalating this," she said, her tone shifting again, reaching for authority beyond herself. "I am contacting regional compliance." The words were meant to restore order, to re-establish control, but they only confirmed what the room was beginning to realize. This was no longer a simple interaction. This was something larger, something that had already moved beyond her reach. Vanessa's gaze lifted now, meeting Emily's directly for the first time, and there was no anger there, no frustration, only clarity, the kind that made people uncomfortable because it carried certainty. "Good," she said, her voice even, almost quiet, but it carried, cutting through the tension without effort. "They are already listening." Emily blinked, just once, the smallest break in composure, and in that single moment the balance shifted. Again, not visibly, not yet, but enough that the room felt it, like the air itself had changed direction. Behind the counter, the teller's screen refreshed, a subtle flicker that went unnoticed by most but not by her. Her eyes widened slightly as new fields populated, access levels expanded, logs appeared where there had been none before. She did not speak this time. She did not need to. The evidence was building in silence. And somewhere beyond the branch, beyond the polished floors and controlled voices, the protocol continued to unfold, quiet, precise, irreversible. And for the first time since Vanessa had stepped through the doors, the question in the room was no longer who she was, but who had just made the mistake of treating her like she did not belong. Emily's fingers tightened slightly against the marble, not enough for anyone to call it out, but enough to betray the shift happening beneath her composure. She glanced toward the terminal again, this time unable to stop herself, and what she saw there did not match the narrative she had been building, not even close. The teller's screen now displayed layers of access that did not belong to an ordinary account, permissions stacked upon permissions, internal tags that were not visible at branch level, markers that signaled oversight far above anything she could control. The teller leaned back, just a fraction, her breath catching as she read, her voice lower now, Almost careful. This account is flagged at executive clearance, she said, and the words did not echo. They settled. Heavy. Undeniable. The man in the navy suit took another step forward, no longer hiding his interest, while the woman near the office door exchanged a glance with someone beside her, silent communication passing between them as the situation unfolded. Emily straightened again, forcing her expression back into something firm, something managerial. But the edges were slipping. There has to be an error, she said, more to herself than anyone else. But the teller shook her head slowly, eyes still locked on the screen. It is not an error, she replied, and this time there was no hesitation, only certainty. Vanessa remained exactly where she was, her posture unchanged, her presence steady, as if all of this had been expected, as if every word spoken against her had already been accounted for. She did not rush, did not interrupt. She simply allowed the truth to arrive in its own time. Because she knew something they were only beginning to understand, the system did not react emotionally. It responded with precision, and once it started moving, it did not stop. One of the guards shifted again, his stance now clearly less assertive, his attention divided between Vanessa and the unfolding information behind the counter. The balance of authority had begun to tilt, not dramatically, but enough that everyone in the room could feel it. Emily reached for the phone at the counter, dialing quickly, her movements sharper now, driven by urgency instead of control. "This is Whitmore at Branch 17, she said into the receiver, her voice tight, controlled but strained. "I need immediate confirmation on a high level." Account flagged under corporate access. She paused, listening, her eyes flicking again toward the screen, toward Vanessa, toward the room that was no longer on her side. And then came the change, subtle at first, a shift in her expression, a tightening around the eyes, the smallest delay in her response. "Yes," she said slowly, her voice losing some of its edge. "I understand." Another pause, longer this time, and when she spoke again, it was quieter, almost measured. "We will hold," she placed the receiver down with care, too much care, as if any sudden movement might shatter what little control she had left. The silence that followed was different now, not tense in the same way, but expectant, like the room itself was waiting for something to be confirmed. Vanessa finally lifted her eyes fully, meeting Emily's gaze without effort, and in that moment there was no question of balance anymore, no ambiguity about where this was heading, because the system had spoken, and it was only a matter of time before everyone else understood exactly what that meant. Emily did not speak right away, and that silence said more than anything she could have forced into words, her eyes no longer scanning the room, but fixed on Vanessa with a new kind of focus, not dismissive, not superior, but searching, calculating, trying to reconcile what she had just been told with what she thought she knew. The guards had stepped back now, not instructed, not announced, just instinctively creating space, their posture no longer one of control but of observation. The shift was complete, and everyone in the room felt it, even those who did not fully understand it yet. The man in the navy suit moved closer to the counter, standing just a few feet away now, his expression no longer neutral but alert, attentive, as if he were witnessing something important unfold in real time. Behind the counter, the teller swallowed again, her hands resting lightly on the desk, as if she did not trust herself to move too quickly, her voice barely above a whisper when she spoke. "There is a full audit trail attached," she said, her eyes flicking up for a moment before returning to the screen. "Every interaction is being logged." That statement landed differently than the others. It was not about status, not about access. It was about consequence. Emily's jaw tightened slightly, the realization settling in, not all at once, but piece by piece, each detail pressing against the version of reality she had been holding on to. She reached for the phone again, but this time she did not dial immediately. Her fingers hovered over the keypad, hesitating, as if she understood that whatever came next would not be something she could control. Vanessa remained still, her presence unchanged, but now the stillness carried weight, not passive, not quiet, but deliberate, like a decision that had already been made long before anyone else in the room realized they were part of it. She had learned over the years that power did not announce itself. It revealed itself, and only when it mattered. A soft chime came from the terminal, subtle but sharp enough to cut through the tension. The teller's eyes widened again as new information populated the screen, higher-level access confirmations, internal identifiers, names that did not belong to branch operations, but to corporate leadership, to oversight, to ownership. She looked up. This time, unable to hold it in. "This is not just a corporate account," she said, her voice steadier now, strengthened by what she was seeing. "This is tied to executive control." The words shifted the room completely. No longer uncertain, no longer speculative. Something had been confirmed, something that could not be dismissed or explained away. Emily's composure faltered, just for a second, but it was enough. Her shoulders lowered slightly, the rigid structure she had been holding on to, beginning to give way. She looked at Vanessa again, really looked this time, not at the clothes, not at the surface, but at the presence, the stillness, the certainty that had been there from the moment she walked in. And for the first time, Emily did not see someone out of place. She saw someone she had misjudged, and the weight of that realization settled heavily in the air. Vanessa finally spoke, her voice calm, even, but now it carried something more, something undeniable. "You said I did not belong here," she said, not as a question, not as an accusation, but as a statement of fact. And in the silence that followed, the room understood that whatever came next would not be about correcting a mistake. It would be about answering for it. The words did not echo. They settled, heavy and final, and for a moment no one moved. Not the guards, not the teller, not even the customers who had slowly gathered closer without realizing it. Emily opened her mouth as if to respond, but nothing came out. Her authority, once loud and certain, now reduced to something fragile, something that could not withstand the weight of what had just been revealed. Vanessa did not raise her voice, did not step forward. She simply stood there, her presence filling the space in a way that no title ever could. "You question my legitimacy," she continued, her tone even, controlled, each word landing with precision. "You denied service, called security, and did it all in front of witnesses." The man in the navy suit nodded almost imperceptibly, as if confirming the truth of what he had seen, while the woman near the office door exhaled slowly, her expression shifting from discomfort to clarity. Emily finally found her voice, but it was different now, lower, less certain. "There was no way for us to know," she said, the words sounding thinner the moment they left her lips, like something she had repeated before without ever questioning it. Vanessa's eyes did not leave hers. "That is exactly the problem," she replied, and the room seemed to hold its breath. The statement simple but cutting, not loud, not emotional, just undeniable. Behind the counter, the teller's screen updated again, a new notification appearing. Internal messaging from corporate. Urgent, flagged. The teller swallowed as she read, her voice barely steady. "There is a directive coming through," she said, her eyes scanning quickly. "It is marked priority." Emily turned sharply, instinct pulling her back toward the one thing she still understood, procedure, structure, but even that was slipping. She leaned toward the screen, reading, her expression shifting again, this time unmistakably, the last trace of confidence draining away. The directive was clear, immediate, and not open to interpretation. She stepped back slowly, as if distance might change what she had just seen, but it did not. Nothing in the room did. Vanessa reached for her phone once more, not to call, not to check anything, just to hold it for a moment before setting it back down, her movements calm, unhurried, as if time itself had aligned with her pace. She had not come here to argue, not to explain, not to prove herself to people who had already decided who she was the moment she walked in. She had come to see, to confirm, and now she had. The guard nearest her cleared his throat softly, not speaking, just acknowledging the shift, while the second guard lowered his gaze briefly, the authority they had carried minutes ago now replaced by something quieter, something closer to understanding. Emily looked at Vanessa again, but this time there was no judgment in her eyes, only realization, and behind it, the beginning of something else, something heavier, the awareness that this moment would not end when the conversation did, that it would follow her beyond this room, beyond this day. Vanessa spoke one final time, her voice steady, unshaken. "This was never about who I am," she said, pausing just long enough for the words to settle. It was about who you believed I was. And as the silence returned, deeper now, fuller, the room understood that what had just happened was not a misunderstanding. It was a decision, and decisions, once made, always carried consequences for a brief moment. The room slipped into something quieter than silence, not empty, but heavy, as if every word that had been spoken was still hanging in the air, waiting to be acknowledged. Vanessa's gaze drifted past Emily, not dismissive, not avoiding, but distant, like she was looking through the present into something older, something familiar, because this was not new, not really. At 23, she stood in a bank just like this one. Different city, same polished counters, same controlled voices. A teller had frozen her account without explanation, citing irregular activity. Even though every dollar was accounted for, she remembered the way. People had looked at her then, not with curiosity, but with quiet suspicion, as if success did not belong to her, as if numbers needed to be questioned when they came from someone who looked like her. She had stood there that day too, calm, composed, explaining facts that should have been enough, but were not. And at 26 it happened again. A loan officer smiled politely while rejecting her application. Even though she brought in more collateral than required, he called it risk. She called it something else. And now, years later, standing in a space shaped by policies she helped design, she saw the same pattern unfold. Different faces, same assumptions. The memory did not make her angry. It sharpened her. It reminded her why she built what she built, why she created systems that did not rely on perception, systems that recorded truth instead of interpreting it. Vanessa blinked once, slowly, the present coming back into focus, the marble counter, the flickering screen, the quiet tension that had replaced earlier judgment. Emily stood across from her, no longer certain, no longer in control, the weight of what had happened settling deeper with every passing second. Behind the counter, the teller continued to read, her eyes moving quickly now, absorbing updates that seemed to arrive in real time, audit logs expanding, internal messages stacking, confirmation after confirmation appearing where doubt had once been. She looked up again, this time not hesitant, not unsure, but grounded in what she knew to be true. This is being reviewed at the highest level, she said, her voice steady, clear, and the words did not just inform, they shifted everything. The man in the navy suit let out a quiet breath, almost a laugh of disbelief, while the woman near the office door nodded slowly, as if the pieces had finally aligned in her mind. The guards remained still, but their presence had changed completely, no longer enforcing, no longer guiding, just witnessing, like everyone else. Vanessa placed her hand lightly on the counter, not claiming space, not demanding attention, just resting it there, grounded, present. Her voice when she spoke was calm, but carried a quiet finality. I have been in rooms like this before, she said, not looking at Emily alone, but allowing the room to hear it. Not because I did not belong, but because someone decided I did not fit their idea of who should. She paused, not for effect, but because the truth did not need to rush, and every time, the system corrected them. Her words were not a threat, not a warning, just a statement of pattern, of history, of consequence. And as the room absorbed it, the understanding became clear. This moment was not isolated. It was part of something larger, something that had been building long before anyone here realized they were standing inside it. And now, there was no stopping what came next. The shift was no longer subtle. It was visible now, undeniable, like a current running through every corner of the room. The teller's screen refreshed again, this time with a sharper tone. A system alert that did not belong to routine operations. Her eyes widened as lines of text populated faster than she could process them. Internal audit initiated, branch activity under review, executive oversight engaged. She inhaled slowly, steadying herself before speaking. It has escalated, she said, her voice clear, no longer hesitant. This branch is now under live audit. The words landed with weight, not dramatic, but absolute, the kind that did not invite interpretation. Emily's posture shifted again, her shoulders no longer squared with authority, but drawn slightly inward, as if she could feel the structure around her changing. That is not possible, she said, but the denial lacked force. It sounded more like a question than a statement. Vanessa did not respond immediately. She Let the moment settle. Let the system speak in ways she did not need to. Because this was never about proving anything out loud. It was about allowing truth to surface where it had been ignored. The man in the navy suit stepped closer still, now standing directly beside the counter, his eyes moving between Vanessa and the screen, absorbing every detail, while another customer pulled out a phone, not to record, but to check something, as if needing confirmation from somewhere outside the room. The guards stood still, their presence now neutral, no longer aligned with instruction, just part of the audience witnessing what had become something far beyond their role. Emily reached for the phone again, dialing with urgency, her fingers moving faster now, driven by something she could not control. "This is Whitmore," she said when the line connected, her voice tight. "I need immediate clarification on a system override at Branch 17. She paused, listening, her expression changing. In real time, confusion giving way to something heavier, something closer to realization. "Yes," she said slowly. "I see the directive." Another pause, longer, and when she spoke again, her voice had dropped. "Understood." She lowered the phone with care, not looking at anyone for a moment, as if recalibrating her place in a situation that had moved beyond her. Vanessa finally spoke, her voice calm, but now carrying a quiet authority that did not need to rise. "Every word spoken in this room is now part of that audit," she said, not as a warning, not as a threat, but as a fact, and the room absorbed it instantly, the implications spreading through the silence like a ripple. The teller glanced down again, scrolling through logs that seemed to capture everything. Timestamps, identifiers, internal flags, nothing missing, nothing softened, just the truth, exactly as it happened. The woman near the office door shook her head slightly, a quiet disbelief crossing her face, while the man in the navy suit exhaled slowly, the kind of breath people take when they realize they are witnessing something irreversible. Emily looked up again, meeting Vanessa's gaze, and this time there was no resistance left, only the understanding that the moment had passed the point of correction, that what had been said and done could not be undone, only answered for. Vanessa rested her hand lightly against the counter once more, grounded, steady, her presence unchanged, because she had known from the beginning how this would unfold, not the details, not the exact words, but the pattern, the system, the inevitable shift from assumption to accountability. And now, as the audit continued to expand beyond the walls of the branch, it was clear to everyone watching that this was no longer about a single interaction. It was about everything that led up to it, and everything that would follow. The room did not move, but everything inside it had already changed. The air felt different, heavier, as if every person standing there understood they were no longer witnessing a misunderstanding, but the unraveling of something much bigger. Vanessa lifted her eyes slowly, not rushed, not dramatic, just enough to meet Emily's gaze with a clarity that left no space for doubt. And when she spoke, her voice did not rise. It did not need to. "My name is Vanessa Carter," she said, each word steady, grounded. "Chief Executive Officer of Carter Holdings." The title did not echo. It settled, precise, deliberate, and before anyone could react, she continued, "Majority stakeholder in this institution." The silence that followed was immediate, absolute, the kind that made even the smallest movement feel amplified. The teller froze, her hands still resting on the counter, her eyes widening as the information on her screen aligned perfectly with what had just been said. The identifiers, the access levels, the executive flags, all pointing to the same truth. The man in the navy suit took a step back, not out of fear, but out of recognition, as if the space itself required adjustment, while the woman near the office door brought her hand lightly to her mouth, absorbing the weight of the moment. Emily did not speak, not because she chose not to, but because the words she had used earlier no longer had a place to stand. They had collapsed under the reality now in front of her. Vanessa's expression did not change. She did not look satisfied, did not look angry. She looked certain, like someone who had reached the end of a process she had already understood from the beginning. "You said I did not belong," she continued, her voice calm, unwavering, "in a bank that answers to me." The words were not loud, but they carried through the room with a force that could not be ignored, not because of volume, but because of truth. The guard nearest her lowered his gaze completely now, stepping back. Another half step, removing himself from a situation he no longer had any authority over. The second guard followed, their presence dissolving into the background, no longer part of the equation. The teller looked down at her screen again, scrolling quickly, confirming what she already knew, her voice barely above a whisper when she spoke. "It is confirmed," she said, and that confirmation sealed it, not just for the system, but for everyone in the room. Emily's shoulders dropped, the tension that had held her upright now gone, replaced by something heavier, something harder to carry, the realization that every decision she had made in the last few minutes had been based on an assumption that no longer existed. Vanessa placed her hand lightly on the counter once more, not claiming the space, but grounding the moment. "The problem was never access," she said, her tone even, controlled. "It was perception." And as the words settled, the room understood that this was not just a reveal. It was a reckoning, because everything that had happened before this moment was now being seen for what it truly was. Not confusion, not procedure, but a choice. And now, that choice had a name, a face, and a consequence that could no longer be avoided. No one spoke, not because they were told to be silent, but because there was nothing left to say that could change what had already been set in motion. The truth had settled into the room like weight, pressing against every surface, every person, every decision that had been made just minutes earlier. Emily stood still, her eyes no longer sharp with judgment, but distant, as if replaying every word she had spoken and hearing them for the first time. Stripped of authority, stripped of assumption, the teller's screen continued to update, lines of internal communication stacking rapidly, confirmations, escalations, directives, each one reinforcing the same reality. This was no longer contained within the branch. This had moved beyond it, into a system designed to respond without bias, without hesitation. "There is a secondary directive," the teller said carefully, her voice steady but quieter now, aware of the gravity of what she was reading. "It is authorizing immediate administrative review of all branch-level decisions made within the last hour." The words did not need emphasis. They carried their own weight. The man in the navy suit exhaled slowly, shaking his head just slightly, not in disbelief anymore, but in recognition, as if he understood exactly what that meant. The woman near the office door crossed her arms again, but this time not in defense. In reflection, her gaze moving from Emily to Vanessa and back again, connecting the moment to something larger than just what she had witnessed. The guards remained still at the edge of the space, no longer participants, just observers. Their earlier presence now a quiet reminder of how quickly authority can shift when its foundation is exposed. Vanessa did not move, her posture unchanged, her expression calm, not satisfied, not vindictive, just certain, because this was never about reaction. It was about process, about allowing the system to reveal what people tried to hide behind policy and tone. Emily finally spoke, her voice lower than before, stripped of the edge it once carried. "I made a judgment based on incomplete information," she said, but even as the words left her, they felt insufficient, incomplete in their own way. Vanessa's eyes remained steady on her, not harsh, not forgiving, just present. "No," Vanessa replied quietly. "You made a judgment based on what you believed was enough." The correction was precise, not emotional, and it landed deeper because of it. The teller glanced at the screen again, then back up, her voice firm now, grounded in what she was seeing. "Access credentials are being reviewed," she said. "Branch-level authority is temporarily restricted pending audit completion." The shift was immediate, not visible in action, but felt in presence. Emily's shoulders lowered further. The structure she had relied on no longer fully hers to control. The room absorbed it, every person understanding in their own way that something irreversible had just taken place. Vanessa reached for her tablet, lifting it slightly before setting it back down again. Not leaving. Not yet, because this moment was not finished, not until the system completed what it had started. And as the quiet continued to stretch, no longer tense but resolved, it became clear to everyone watching that this was not just a consequence. It was a correction, one that did not need to be forced, because it was built into the very system that had just been activated. The next change did not come from a voice in the room. It came from the system itself, quiet but absolute. The teller's screen dimmed for half a second before refreshing with a new interface, one that did not belong to branch operations. Her posture straightened instinctively as she read, her voice steady but carrying a new weight. "Administrative override confirmed," she said, and the words settled across the space like a final line being drawn. Emily did not move, but her eyes shifted toward the screen again, this time without resistance, without denial, just acceptance of what was unfolding. The teller continued, "Branch 17 operations are now suspended pending full review." And there it was, not loud, not dramatic, but definitive. The man in the navy suit let out a slow breath, his gaze lowering for a moment before lifting again, taking in the entire room as if it had changed shape around him. The woman near the office door stepped back slightly, not out of fear, but out of respect for what she was witnessing, something larger than any one person, something systemic, something real. The guards remained at a distance, their earlier presence now completely dissolved, their role replaced by quiet observation. Vanessa stood exactly where she had been, her posture unchanged, her expression calm. Not satisfied, not celebratory, just aligned with the outcome that had now arrived. She did not need to move, did not need to say anything more for the moment, because the system was speaking clearly enough. Emily finally exhaled, the tension leaving her shoulders in a slow release. Not dramatic, not visible to everyone, but enough to show that the structure she had relied on was no longer holding her up. She looked around the room briefly, taking in the faces that had watched the entire exchange, the subtle shifts in their expressions, the quiet understanding that had replaced earlier assumptions. Then her gaze returned to Vanessa, not defensive, not challenging, just aware. The teller glanced down again, scrolling through the latest updates, her voice steady, professional, but unmistakably changed. "All active transactions are paused," she said. "Access is restricted to executive authorization only." And the implication was clear. Authority had been redefined in real time, not reassigned, but revealed. Vanessa reached for her phone, lifting it once more, this time checking the screen briefly before placing it back down with the same quiet precision she had maintained from the beginning. Everything was moving exactly as it should, not rushed, not delayed, just precise. The kind of precision that did not come from reaction, but from design. Emily's voice came softer now, not weak, but stripped of anything unnecessary. "What happens next?" she asked, not as a challenge, not as a demand, but as someone finally understanding that she was no longer the one determining the answer. Vanessa looked at her for a moment, her gaze steady, composed. Then she replied, her voice even, carrying the same quiet authority it always had. "Now the system finishes what it started." And as those words settled into the room, no one questioned them, because by now, everyone understood that this moment was not about punishment alone. It was about exposure, about accountability, about the undeniable truth that had moved through the space without needing to raise its voice. And as the branch stood still under the weight of that realization, it became clear that nothing inside it would be the same once the system was done. No one rushed to move. No one reached for the door, because the moment had not ended. It had settled, deeper now, quieter, like something permanent had been written into the space itself. The systems behind the walls continued their silent work, unseen but undeniable, and for the first time since it all began, the bank did not feel like a place of transaction. It felt like a place of truth. Vanessa looked around slowly, not to claim anything, not to command attention, but to acknowledge what had just unfolded, the people who had watched, the silence that had shifted, the understanding that had replaced assumption. She had seen rooms like this before, rooms where power was mistaken for position, where authority was confused with appearance. And she had learned something long before this moment. Correction does not need noise. It needs clarity. Emily stood still across from her, no longer trying to explain, no longer reaching for control, just present, absorbing the weight of what had happened and what it meant. Beyond this moment, beyond this branch, the teller closed her hands gently on the counter, no longer uncertain, no longer hesitant, grounded in what she had witnessed and what the system had confirmed. The guards remained at the edge of the room, quiet, respectful, their earlier role now replaced by something more human, awareness. The man in the navy suit nodded once, almost to himself, as if marking the moment. While the woman near the office door exhaled slowly, her expression no longer tense, but thoughtful, reflective, Vanessa reached for her tablet, lifting it with the same calm precision she had carried from the beginning. She did not rush, did not look back immediately, because she did not need to. Everything that needed to happen was already in motion. She paused for just a moment, then spoke, her voice steady, clear, not loud, but final. "I did not need to raise my voice," she said, her eyes moving briefly across the room, meeting no one and everyone at the same time. Because the truth already had won. The words settled into the space, not as a statement of victory, but as a reminder, a reflection of what had just occurred. She turned then, taking a step away from the counter, her movement unhurried, grounded, the kind of movement that comes from certainty, not escape, not retreat, but completion. Behind her, the systems continued to run, the audit continued to expand, decisions would be reviewed, actions would be examined, not in anger, not in haste, but with precision, the kind that does not forget, the kind that does not overlook. And as she walked toward the exit, the room did not return to what it had been. It could not, because something had shifted, not just in policy, not just in process, but in perception. And long after she stepped through the doors and into the daylight beyond, the truth of that moment remained, not in noise, not in spectacle, but in the quiet understanding that real power does not need to prove itself. It simply waits until it is seen.